least action? Is it vision or the lack? That brings me back to the principle of least action, by which in one branch of a rabbinical thought, the world might become the kingdom of peace, not through the tumult and destruction necessary for a new start, but by adjusting little parts a little bit, maybe turn that cup a quarter inch or scoot up that bench. Imagines an incremental resurrection, a radiant body, puzzled out through tinkering with the fit of what's available, as though what is right already, but askew. It is tempting for any person who would like to love what she can do. All right, what was that? Gosh, if I know. All right, so that was a poem, naturally. And if anybody is trying to speak in the background, there's no voice at all. So that poem was, yeah, so it was called Least Action.
There's no voice?
Now there's some sound coming now from the disembodied voice in the background is now speaking, which I will introduce him shortly. But
what is this? What okay. Are we watching?
Yeah. Oh, gosh. Yes. What are you watching? All right. Fine. Might as well. You're watching SG2 on Space, the only weekly space show. Hopefully you're watching this on youtube.com/@shinga/streams. Alternatively, you might be watching it at, well, the ticker here. But first of all, let me bring on the disembodied voice so that it doesn't sound so strange right there. How are you doing? Oh, yes, a new headband. Or maybe an old one. I don't know.
I have a lot. It's my swag. This one doesn't really match. I usually pick one that will match my shirt better than this one. Nobody said anything to me today, but
anyway. Do people normally say something?
No, so usually they say, I like your headband, or your headband matches your shirt, or,
right.
Get back to work. They'll say things.
Okay. That's pretty funny.
Yeah. Hey, put the poem back up for a sec. Can you put the poem back up? No,
I can. I was.
Oh, by the way, who am I? Oh,
yes, exactly.
We're gonna do that.
Dr. Leonard Kramer here. This I need to also, before putting the poem back on, let me just say this is episode 179, and we're talking about Lagrangian mechanics, and the poem, which is called Least Action, is not written by a physicist. I don't know who wrote it.
I kind of liked it. I like that poem. I want to least action, and we don't know. So, okay, line 6. There's 7. Line 6. Branch of rabbinical thought.
Right.
How did you pronounce it? You said rabbinical.
I don't know how to pronounce it. Clearly, I pronounced it completely incorrectly. So. Rabbinical, right?
Rabbinical. Anyway, I like this poem.
Should have asked you to. Well, I think this poem is saying that maybe the world can become this kingdom of peace, whether you believe in the religion or not. This perfect utopia, I suppose, not through a sudden change, but through gradual changes that eventually, turns this into
something like that. But
right.
Anyway,
perhaps it is related to physics after all, because one of the things of Lagrangian mechanics is the principle of least action. But before we actually go into all of that, what is actually, first of all, I have to say, also you can watch the show on, I do have to say this, on podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/SG2 on Space. And you can hear those, but there won't be live episodes. There'll be audio episodes.
You won't be able to see me, so
yes, I mean that's such a downside, But some people like using, Spotify or other platforms like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I do actually.
Of course, also support the show, patreon.com/SG2 on Space. And definitely thank you to our supporters and previous people who have helped, Kyle Baker, Sam Welsh, Tim Roth, and I'm just going to have to keep the scrolling for now. All right, back to the topic at hand. So let me just throw this at you. We all know most of us have heard of like Newton's laws, or like people who watch the show probably have, because they're nerds to some degree, even if they're not formally trained. So you may have heard like F equals ma, or something like force equals mass times acceleration. But what is this thing? What is
Well,
Lagrangian mechanics though?
yeah,
What is all that?
so usually at the high school level and even the college undergraduate level, you if you're exposed to physics and people who take any of the STEM disciplines, will be exposed to the Newtonian physics, which is the laws of motion. I don't know if I can enumerate there's three laws. Well, anyway, an object that at rest tends to remain at rest unless it's acted on by a force. So I guess we say force is equal to the mass times the acceleration, and then things like that. And basically the idea is that this is for Newtonian mechanics that we learn about. The state of the universe or the state of a system at this point in time determines the state at a future time over a small increment of time. So you have these equations of motion, and we integrate them. We mathematically integrate them forward in time, and we can get the state of the system. So for example, if I throw a ball up in the air, right? I give it a little initial velocity, and it will go up, 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 and slow down, and then it'll start to fall and come down faster. Or if I throw it like in an arc like that, it'll follow a particular kind of trajectory. So we all know about that. What people don't know and you learn about this maybe if you're actually a physics major or in graduate school, is that there's an alternate way of looking at that, and it has to do with an integral, a mathematical integral over the entire path of the particle, of the object that we're talking about. And it could be a photon. Yeah, there we go. It could be a rock being thrown off a cliff. And let's see. And this has to do with a property that's called action, and really it's called action. I think Leibniz came up um, with that terminology. What that means is that if you have the kinetic energy, which is how much energy, a scalar number associated with the energy, which has to do with how much energy that's imparted to an object by virtue of its motion. So and the number, we say it's mv squared over 2. It's the kinetic energy of an object. And then we have the potential. So if you're in a gravitational field, for example, and you lift an object up higher, then it has some energy by virtue of where it is or what forces are acting on it. And so those two things kind of interplay together and will allow you to determine the motion of the particle. And in particular, there's this thing called action, and usually you use the letter capital S, and it stands for the kinetic energy, which is that energy, minus the potential energy in the coordinate, in a particular set of coordinates. And that of all the paths there, you see this dude is throwing this ball, and there's all these trajectories that it could follow. But the one that it actually does follow, if you integrate this thing called action over the path, that path has the smallest action.
Is that action the same as a Lagrangian?
It's the same as well. The Lagrangian is the Lagrangian is the quantity kinetic energy minus potential energy. That's the Lagrangian. Right. And then the integral of the Lagrangian over a path. So you see there's an alternate path there. You see the dotted line that's longer than the true path.
Yeah.
Well, the action for that path would be the integral. You'd add it up along.
Okay, you take the integral.
Yeah, you'd add it up all along there. And so there's an infinity of paths, infinity of different kinds of paths. You could go up and then down and around and all this kind of thing. But physics and nature wants to conserve the total amount of action that is that's going along the actual path. So what really happens? Yeah, there it is. See, kinetic energy minus potential energy, and he's integrating it with time along the path, and then the path that it actually follows is the one where that number s is the smallest. Okay, so now that sounds pretty weird, I guess. It's like, why is this guy talking about this stuff? Is, I guess, is a question.
Well,
So why am I talking about this?
I mean,
So
that's pretty interesting to me. But go
yeah,
on.
so historically, in ancient times, like there was a Greek who lived in Roman Egypt around the 1st century, Hero, and
Mhm.
he had this idea. He was thinking about light, and he noticed, well, light always goes in a straight line, right? And that's so it follows the shortest distance, right?
Right.
And then so that was and then Aristotle and all the others would talk about that. But then later on in the I guess the 18th century, there was somebody named Fermat, and he's known for his lost theorem and that kind of. The ancients didn't really know about refraction very much. I guess they did see light in water, and they noticed the weird things that go on when, it distorts shapes and that kind of thing. But by the 16th and 17th, 18th century, people had experience with lenses and glass, and they noticed that light could follow a curved path or a bent path. And Fermat figured out that it's not actually the straightest path that light will follow, but it's the it's the path that light travels in the least amount of time, right? So here we had this minimizing principle. And sometimes you see people talk about, well, I have to get across the river in the shortest amount of time because you know, there's something over there that I got to get to really fast. And so you could run the part of the way and then get in the water and swim across. And depending upon where you enter the water, you'll get the least amount of time. See, so because you swim slower than you run. So or a least time kind of principle. And so people were, and then after Newton actually didn't have this insight. Yeah, Newton, but others who followed him were came to this conclusion that it's actually this thing called action that's minimized. And the neat thing about it, I mean, the neat thing about it is that you have to, when you're learning physics, you deal with all these vectors and forces, and you have to add up the forces, and then if you're in a rotating, let's say you're in a rotating reference frame, like on the surface of the Earth, you have other forces on you besides just the force that's pushing you. You have, like, I don't know, maybe some people have heard of this thing called Coriolis force and centrifugal force,
Right.
and
Yeah.
and and
Things get
and
really complicated in all
and
these
it's
different frames.
and it's very, very complicated. But I'm telling you, like if we had a blackboard, you know, and I could write the Lagrangian and
Do
integrate
you
it.
want to write the Lagrangian?
Well, we're not really prepared for that right now. But if I were to write the Lagrangian
Well,
in the rotating
Lagrangian,
frame,
didn't you just say it was really simple? It was T minus V.
yeah, it's t minus v, but you have to do it in the right coordinates. Okay, and so there's a thing you can do. It's like these
Mhm.
what are they called? Euler Lagrange equations, right? And so you can, like, it's almost like turning a crank, and out
Uh,
pop the equations of motion, and that centrifugal force and the Coriolis force just pop out. It's almost like magic, right? And so physics, when you go to graduate school, you learn these things, and like it's like, and then they tell you, don't tell anyone because you're giving,
don't
yeah,
tell anyone
yeah,
that there's such a thing called like the Euler Lagrange equation.
right. So don't tell anybody about that. So you don't really learn about it, but it's a pretty amazing kind of thing. Um, but let's see, the other application was oh, and so what it says something. Here's one thing is, like we always learn about, like in the Newtonian kind of point of view,
Right.
the state of the world determines the state in the future, right? Based on these equations of motion.
Right. So that's why you have to integrate acceleration, get velocity, integrate
Yeah.
velocity, get position.
Well, the least action principle, where we have you determine the action, what it's saying is that the motion is determined by the entire history of the, you're integrating something over the entire history of its action, of its motion. There they are, right? And so you're integrating over the entire motion, over the entire history, and so it's like something that is sort of like composites everything having to do with the entire history. Like maybe the action of the universe starts at the Big Bang and ends at the heat death of the universe, and all together fully determines the state of the universe. So it's almost like, not quite, but it's almost like things in the future are determining what happens now. Or so it's
Well, okay,
everything
I
in the
see what you
past.
mean. Like basically because in order for like that simple throwing ball analogy a while ago,
Uh-huh.
where the path the ball will follow is the path of least action, and so that's dependent on what's happening in the future as well as what
In
happened in the past.
in a certain respect. Now I can get in trouble for saying that, because a lot of people are going to go, well, no, not really, because it's Newton, not really, because Newton, Newtonian physics, but you derive it, and actually this equation, this Lagrangian mechanics, has general applicability to other areas, for example, general relativity. And actually, an example I wanted to talk about in general relativity was, one of the things that was, general relativity is Einstein's theory about gravity
Mhm.
and time being, uh, gravity. Mass is, represents curvature of space and time together, right? So one of the things that they looked at very early was the advance of the perihelion of Mercury. So Mercury goes very close to the sun, and its path is sort of distorted by general relativity, by the relativistic effect. So the time kind of speeds up when it gets close to the. I'm sorry. Time sort of slows down when it
Slows
gets
down.
close to
Yeah.
the sun, and then it speeds up when it gets at its highest point, perihelion, um, and as as observed from somebody who's out, who's looking at it from far away, and it causes the entire, like it's
Mhm.
the orbit is an ellipse, and so it kind of precesses around in an anomalous way that wasn't explained by classical physics. So I believe Einstein wrote the Lagrangian for the orbit of Mercury, and he wrote it in terms of something called proper time.
I
So
don't know if this has anything to do with it, but
I don't know either, but
yeah, no.
that does kind of look like some general relativity there, because I see a metric and
Yeah.
I see some tensors and stuff like that. But he wrote that, yeah, he wrote the Lagrangian for the orbit of Mercury in terms of the proper time. Proper time is the time that somebody on Mercury keeps. So if you have a clock and you're looking at your clock, it's just going to tick, 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 tick. But if somebody's looking at it from outside, it's going to speed up when it's farthest from the sun, and then it'll slow down when it gets closer to the sun. And so the proper time is the actual motion is determined by the clock, the path where you follow the shortest proper time. So there's a least time principle associated with the orbit of Mercury around the sun, and all the planets. Um, but we notice it with Mercury, and so
Why?
so that yeah, so
So
so the neat thing, wait a minute. So the neat thing about that is it's not just in three-dimensional mechanics, but it's in four-dimensional, space-time, and so it has that applicability. So you can add these constraints where time and space are sort of connected together. I think it's called Lorentzian. I forgot exactly. I think it's called Lorentzian transform. So you have a constraint on the coordinates, by the general relativity um,
Hmm.
stuff that you have to do, and you find out that least action still works, right? So that's kind of a hint that there's something important about it, that it's it's like it's telling us something that um, but anyway, that's what I wanted to talk about.
I mean, what does it tell us that the least action still works?
Well, I mean, it's like if you don't know the equations of motion of something, and you have some very very complicated system, like the equations of motion in a rotating reference frame, like on the Earth,
Hmm.
you just have to like kind of like calm, stay calm, right? Write the Lagrangian and do this thing, right, and then do the operation of the Lagrange Euler equations, and you'll get the equations of motion. And so it means that there's like an underlying principle having to do with these scalar quantities. Kinetic energy, which is a scalar. It's just, at every point in
Hmm.
time, at every place, you have one number that represents the kinetic energy, and you have one number that represents the potential energy. And the difference between those, with the coordinates that you're given and the constraints that are applied to it, will determines the equations of motion, its evolution in time. And so it's um, I wonder what people really think about this. It's like, does it sound so esoteric that it's sort of, you know meaningless? But no, it actually is. That's actually what physicists do. So when they're trying to find the equations of something, um, I had a task where I have a particular kind of transformation. We can talk about this someday. These things called quaternions, which is it's a way of expressing um, a coordinate transformation, like a rotation, and they have application to video games and so forth. And so we needed to rotate them to figure out how to do a transform on them, but they have to maintain a unit length, right? And so that constraint you could put in there, and I had some tasks to do that. Sometimes, there's a problem where you have the Earth is an oblate. Um,
Hmm.
it's like an oval, like a squashed oval shape. Trying to find the least distance on that surface for a spherical Earth, it's kind of it's just geometry. But
Right.
if you want to find the least distance, like from one point to another point on a flattened Earth, on an oblate Earth, you
Basically, like our realistic Earth, right? Yeah.
yes, yeah. So there are algorithms. This was done long ago, but there are algorithms where you can figure out what direction do I need to go in order to and I stay straight. I follow the curve of the oblate, what they call oblate spheroid. I stay on that, and then of all of the possible directions that I can go, there's one direction and one curve that I follow that gives me the least amount of distance, that, or at least the least amount of time that I would spend traveling on a straight line. So, um, so it has great applicability, and it's like a workhorse. It's like when you have a problem like that where you need to minimize something, you will you'll
You
use that.
will you could
Hmm.
use this,
You
right?
could use that. Um, there's also problems like where you have two like a string, and you
Hmm.
suspend it between two uprights, two vertical pieces. What's the curve that follows? And
Uh, I, I know what you're talking about.
it's called a
And
catenary.
catenary, right?
Yes. And
Yeah.
there's also a problem where you want to have like a roller coaster, right? So the roller coaster, you can very careful you can estimate or determine, what the accelerations are, on a roller coaster, because then the roller coaster doesn't have to follow. That's a catenary. The roller coaster can follow
Mhm.
some kind of arbitrary uh, um, path. Let's see, the Aerosmith ride at Disney World.
The Aerosmith ride, does that follow some optimal
No,
path?
it doesn't. It, it does a
I was like, are you going to
spiral.
go into that?
Okay. Yeah, it does. I remember it does a spiral where you go around like that, and you go weightless briefly. So, and actually, if people don't like roller coasters, you could take some pharmacological agent that could, relax you enough to be able to
Oh my
experience
gosh,
that.
what great advice you offer here.
Well, with a
Okay,
prescription, with
got
with
it. Of course.
so you with it.
But yeah, go on.
So anyway, so I'm sure that the engineers that were developing the Aerosmith ride at is it Epcot or Disney World? Is it?
I mean, Epcot belongs to Disney.
It's
so
out there somewhere. It's either Epcot or Disney World. I loved it. I thought it was a great movie. But you drop the cars, and all the people are screaming and everything like that, and they're going down, and then it comes down and turns around, and it goes through this spiral. So the engineers that built that undoubtedly started with a Lagrangian recipe for the equations of motion, so that they could determine the accelerations that they were subjecting their clients, their customers, their park enthusiasts to. So anyway,
yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense. Where I mean, you have to do that. So
whoa, there it is, roller coasters.
I mean, this thing's animated, so I don't know how well you can see that.
So
is it moving? It's moving,
yeah.
right? Yeah. So I mean,
so that's all. That's it's and so probably some people who already know about this probably want me to talk about not only Lagrangian mechanics, because Lagrangian is really the main interesting physical thing. There was another guy named Hamilton.
Yep, the Hamiltonian mechanics,
not the musical.
Right, of course. Although you could talk about that, but maybe not on this show.
Yeah, well, the world will never be the same. It's another Hamilton, and I think he was Scottish, and he was also playing with these equations and kind of extended the Lagrangian theory to express the set of equations. The Lagrange equations give you second order, meaning you get the second derivative with respect to time and then position, and so it's a little bit messy that way. But Hamilton played around with momentum and coordinate position and momentum, and he sort of generalized those things and produced a system that was similar to the Lagrangian. In fact, it's the same physics. It's just a mathematical expression that allows you to treat momentum.
Instead of the Lagrangian, which is kinetic energy minus potential, it's the Hamiltonian, which is total energy.
Well, right? It's equal to the total energy, but the expression of the Hamiltonian is the kinetic energy plus the potential energy,
right,
in the coordinates. So it's not just the number that it's equal to. It has to do with the form of the equation. So the kinetic energy typically has velocities in it, and the potential typically has coordinates or positions in it. It can also have velocities in it for certain kinds of problems. It has applicability to electrodynamics, and there's a thing called vector potential. We talked about Maxwell's equations. And so it has some applicability to that as well. So Hamilton kind of took the Lagrange theory. He didn't introduce any new physics. Okay, so it's all Lagrangian physics, right? But he manipulated the equations in a way that gives us a way of treating momentum and coordinates in a sort of symmetrical form. So yeah, so there you see, it's not just kinetic energy plus potential energy. It's kinetic energy in the form of the coordinate velocities, and then in terms of the coordinate positions, for example. So anyway, yeah. There it is.
I mean, this very simplistic, one-dimensional, only one force example is that all of them looked about the same. But for other ones, I mean, you can get a lot more
Yeah, so you can get
complicated.
more complicated. And like I said, like the Coriolis and the centrifugal force, when I've worked with people in problems that require that, they just flounder around and they're always very uncertain about it.
Mhm.
Because it just seems to be very mysterious. But if we formulate the motion in a rotating reference frame where you have this acceleration, and you formulate the kinetic energy in terms of rotation and velocity, and then the potential. Um, the those two terms just fall out, and and so it gives you kind of a sense of confidence that you've got the equations right, and you're not having to look in a book and say Wikipedia said it's this, which I
Right.
get a lot, so.
So, I mean, that doesn't sound like a very good way of saying things.
Well, I
Uh,
mean, like I said, my experience is that people do, like, they feel uncertain about it. So,
Does this
you
look
know,
familiar? Well, this is like a test problem. And rotating reference frame.
yeah, there it is. Yeah. Show that the Lagrangian. Okay, so yeah, that's it. The Lagrangian, and there you see that it's just kind of like if you well, that's the test problem. It's not actually showing you how to do that, but if you follow this recipe for the Lagrangian, and so it has to do with, and I've forgotten, I have to look it up, but it has to do with taking the derivative with respect to the velocity coordinate and the derivative with respect to the position coordinate, and then you form them in a
Right.
certain way using those Lagrange Euler relationships, and then you can manipulate the formula so that you get this
Well, I mean, like,
this thing coming out.
this is all this is saying is that, okay, if you write it in a rotating frame, here's what it is, right?
Yeah.
So,
So, and that the see equation 2, the second term from the left on the left side, from
mhm.
the left, that's the Coriolis force. So that's a Coriolis.
Is it second term from the left?
The second term,
From the left? Oh, right here. Yeah, got it.
that term ends up
There are
being
dots.
something like a Coriolis force, and actually you can there's other things you can do with that as well. And then the other term there is the centrifugal. I believe that's a centrifugal force. This form doesn't really look quite right, but um, that
It's fine. Not asking to, not telling people, hey, look, use this math formula for that. But
right.
um, from the standpoint of stuff you've done, Leonard, have you used the Lagrangian mechanics?
I have. I have.
Okay, you have.
Yes, I have. I've done it. I've used it for the quaternion problem that I mentioned, and some other things that I you know adding constraints to particular kinds of problems, getting equations of motion in certain kinds of situations. But I definitely have used this formulation, um, and that's my story, and I'm sticking with that. So
I mean, I believe you for sure.
yeah.
So, wow, what a exciting development in explaining all
We
that.
never talked about this before. I guess I've always kind of thought it's like it's a thing to talk about. But anyway, people can look up Lagrangian mechanics, and
What
if
for
you
people
want,
to
if you want to,
understand this, what do they need to
I
learn?
think I think if you want to understand it, well, I mean, obviously, look at all those YouTube videos and go through that. If you don't want to go to graduate school and take a class in classical mechanics, you could. I think there are some textbooks that there is a textbook by a guy named Goldstein, that's does classical mechanics, and he does a fair job of it. Another textbook is by Landau and Lifshitz. I like saying that. So, and that's called classical mechanics, and they do a good job.
So essentially, you're saying most classical mechanics books cover it.
At graduate level classical mechanics, I don't know so much about undergraduate. Seems
Right.
in the engineering disciplines, which are also STEM fields, they have a different kind of vocabulary that they use, and so they seem to know about it, but not
Uh,
to the same
the
degree.
engineering realm, you're saying, seems to know about it, but like this is a book you mentioned, right?
So this is Goldstein. I can't remember. I think his name is Herbert Herbert Goldstein, and he lived a long time. But this is that's a classical it's a classic book on classical mechanics. The let's see, that's like the third edition.
There might be a newer edition. I'm just
No,
saying.
that is the new edition. I
Oh,
would
really?
get the second edition. It's a brown.
Okay.
I'd get the second
Is
edition.
that the edition you used?
Yes, that's the one I used. I do have this book, and I went through it, and I found a lot of errors, a lot of inconsistencies between it and the second edition. That guy, you see, one of the authors there is a guy named Safko.
Yeah.
I think he's at Clemson. And so I wrote to him and I said, "Hey, you got a lot of errors in here." And he wrote back something like, "Yeah, sorry about that. Here, we'll add your errors to our list of errors. Thanks." But
You mean your
uh,
corrections? Or
yeah,
that's
yeah.
funny.
So I hope that they have in the most recent. This is as of about, I don't know, 15 years ago when I was looking at this textbook, and I hope that in recent printings that they fixed it all up. But if you get the second edition, which is still in print, possibly because of this issue that I'm talking about, the
Where
second
the second edition
edition,
is actually better. I
the
mean,
sec
doesn't have errors,
the
I
second
guess.
edition does not have any errors. Okay,
That's so
I
funny.
it and so it's very disturbing because I mean, if you're taking a class in this subject, it's hard enough already because the homework is brutal, right? So you can work on a problem for days, right? And if you're not getting the
Right.
answer, and actually actually they give you the answer, right? So it's something like show this or show that, and then so what the answer is. And if you're not getting the answer, you, it's very dispiriting, and
And then it
not
turns
not
out it's not even like the
it
right answer because there's
it's
yeah,
not that's not a good situation. So um
I
so
found it. The second edition is what you should be looking for. That one.
yeah, and
And
it's
that one is just him. I mean, there's nobody else. The
right,
third edition
yeah.
has two other authors.
Right. Yeah.
That's
So
so funny.
his helpers kind of screwed it up. Now I will say the third edition, it does have a chapter on chaos, which is
Okay.
really good. Okay, that's the last chapter that they added, to classical mechanics that they added, and that actually is really good if you want to learn about chaos. But this book, I guess you can I don't know, you can try to read it and see if you can, and then I don't know, call me. Should I give out my phone number?
No, no, don't need to give out your phone number. I mean, that's hilarious. You're like, if you can't understand this book, call Leonard, and then he could explain to you what you should be
Yeah,
reading or
let's not do
engaging.
that.
But
But
what was the other book you said?
oh,
Uh,
Landau and Lifshitz. Landau,
Landau and
Landau. We can talk about Landau also because he's an interesting character.
Landau and Lifshitz, and is that
It's
and
classical. I think it's also called classical mechanics. He has a whole series of books. He and his colleague Lifshitz.
is
And
that third edition a good one?
no, I don't think there's any additions. Anything.
Okay.
There are no errors in it. It dates back to the 60s, and actually it was originally written in Russian because they are Russian scientists.
Ah, I see. Okay.
You can't find that?
No, I did. I mean,
Yeah.
that's interesting that
And so you can get that short little paperback edition of Landau and Lifshitz, and he's very terse and very, but the English translation is good, you know. There it
this
is.
one,
Uh-huh.
Elsevier, you can get it on there,
Yeah, and
or you know,
yeah,
that's
it's actually kind of expensive, you know.
well,
So, um,
third edition, January 1st, 1976.
yeah. So so that'll teach you. You can learn about that. I would say both of those textbooks are good for learning about classical mechanics. We never really talked about about it like this before, about like textbooks and things like that.
Well, I mean, I figure why not? You know, you might as well be instructional.
Landau was a famous scientist. He was like comparable to our Richard Feynman, maybe. And he did work like with superconductivity, and I believe he got a Nobel Prize, um, and in the Soviet Union. So he was able to navigate all the political stuff having to do with living in, you know, in a communist country. He had an accident. He had a car accident in 63 or 64, and he only lived another 5 years, and he was never really quite the same. I think he was driving. He got hit by a truck, and there's this, you can read about it. They tell the story about how all of his students were you know rushing to the hospital, and they were trying to donate
This
blood
guy,
and that kind of thing. Yeah.
right?
So yeah, he had a bad hair. That's just his hair. I don't his head isn't shaped like that.
1962 Nobel Prize in Physics for mathematical theory of superfluidity
So
that
yeah,
accounts for the
superfluidity.
properties
Yeah.
of liquid helium too.
Uh-huh.
Clearly a pretty smart guy.
Yep.
Yeah.
And apparently he was like he was a really tough one, picking his students. Like he would give them this really difficult test, and if you and very few people passed the test, and
This is
all
funny.
sorts of amusing things about him.
He believed in free love rather than monogamy and encouraged his wife and students to practice it. However, his wife was not enthusiastic.
I think I've read that also. So yeah, yeah, some physicists can be sort of like curious characters that way.
But yeah, I see what you said. Like he, age 60, died pretty young from complication injury sustained in a car accident. He bought
Yeah, and
earlier.
I think he had a head injury, and he never really quite recovered from that. So anyway, he's a great guy, I think, and I really like his textbook. But
All right, that was complete aside from actual talking
it's
about.
okay. It's just a conversation. Someday we'll talk about. Someday we can talk about Richard Feynman. He's even
But
more.
it's interesting because people who develop theories or write books that they're humans and they have
There,
interesting backstories.
and
So
Richard Feynman. If we want to talk about, let's talk about Richard Feynman next week.
we can do that. I have a bunch of his books actually. So
Yeah. So
all right. So
anyway,
do you want to talk about something that I want to talk about?
yeah, I absolutely do. It's the highlight of my week.
Is it?
Yeah, this time when we come to
Okay.
this.
So let me see if I can get this going. So this is supposedly taken in New York, somewhere in not New York City, but just somewhere, some backyard over there. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, who knows, right? There's not going to be any sound, so it's just going to be somebody that seemingly is
Okay, I don't
talking.
like the sound anyway.
Well, I think this one is actually all right. Well, anyways, I'm just going to read out what the article was saying. Right. So let's see here. All right. So is it actually playing?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So let me explain what is going on. All right. So this footage comes just days after a family in Vegas reportedly found aliens on their property.
Oh no.
So maybe this was Oh yeah, before it was widely debunked by fact checkers, there's nothing more CGI. Inevitably, another video had now gone viral on this TikTok, where racking up more than 300,000 views at the time of this writing, which was back in June 17th, 2023. So 3 days ago, if you're watching this live. Okay, so this was shared by the account, the paranormal chick, and it claims to show a man in New York. It's not specified when or where, who has apparently found an alien in the backyard. Now,
I hate it when that happens. I hate it when there's aliens in my backyard.
You hate it when there's aliens in
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see.
So
I want to see the alien.
As he searches for the creature with a flashlight, we get a brief glimpse of the alien before it disappears. The man does call out to the alien, which eventually reappears and clearly walks across the frame before again disappearing. I think the video froze, so I have to like watch it. Why is it? Okay, here. So, do you see the alien that's going to appear?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I mean, there's going to be this guy walking around. Why would you walk around with a flashlight outside trying to find an alien in your backyard? I mean,
I wouldn't. I'd call the cops.
this is so okay. I still don't see anything, but well, I don't know. Maybe I missed it. Oh, is that it? That's it.
There
That's
it
it.
is.
Do you see that?
Yeah.
Do you see that?
Yep.
I mean, look at that.
Yep. I think that's one of the Martians.
I mean, how else do you explain what's going on? Look, he's just walking. I mean, okay, then he's gonna.
No, I don't have.
Yeah, look, he's walking again.
I think
Still
it's
walking.
And this was up in New York, right?
Yep. Supposedly somewhere. See, look.
Yeah, this wouldn't happen in Texas. I guess you know what I mean.
Yeah. I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's basically what.
I don't know. Highly compelling.
Don't you think that's pretty compelling?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, now a lot of people remain unconvinced, which makes sense. But you know, it anyways, so
no comment. Just
it's if it is fake, I am wondering. I guess somebody is just like dressed up in a costume and just walking around in the field, and somebody else is just filming it.
Yeah.
Completely possible, I suppose.
But I mean, if you think about it this way, almost anything we see, we're going to think is fake. I mean, what could we see? What could we be exposed to that would convince us without any equivocation, without any uncertainty that we have had an experience?
Like if you see some figure walking around, and somebody takes a video of it, you're going to naturally think, oh, there's somebody dressed in a costume, right?
Right.
That's what you're gonna. Or if it's a video, you're gonna assume that if it looks too good, then somebody like made the video, right?
Yeah. Right.
Like CGI or something.
So it's almost futile.
So I don't know.
What is the evidence? We need to have like thousands of people witness, like in the movie The Day the Earth Stood Still. I don't know if you ever saw that one.
I think I have.
There's a film called, it's really excellent, 1953 science fiction movie about an alien that comes to Earth with a big robot named Gort, and he's there to tell us that we need to get our act together because if we start flying out into space with our nuclear weapons and our our violent manners, they'll take care of us. And so that's what that was an example, so the way they did that was the flying saucer came straight over, it flew around different cities around the world, and then it ended up in Washington, D.C. and landed on a baseball diamond, in front of the White House. And so that was convincing,
Well,
it was Hollywood.
Literally,
yeah.
Well, that's a case where this alien life form explicitly wants to
Yes.
reveal
Right.
its presence.
Uh-huh.
Whereas in these videos, they're trying to hide themselves or whatnot, or they're
Yeah.
just doing their thing,
Yeah. So I don't
supposedly.
know. I don't know what to say. That's if that's the thing that needs to happen. So it's a sort of
All
an
right.
interesting psychological
It,
phenomenon.
it is. I mean,
Um,
it's
there's a guy named Avi Loeb from MIT who he came out. Remember the Oumuamua?
yeah.
Uh, um, it was a asteroid or something like an asteroid that came in from interstellar
Yeah,
space, and
we talked about
we talked about it before.
many
Well,
times
he's
because we love the name.
so he said something on one of the YouTube videos about that. They say, well, extraordinary evidence requires extraordinary proof, and so what he was pointing out is with all of the discussion about how life is common throughout the universe, this is what we should expect. We what would be extraordinary, because if we do accept this principle that life is common,
Hmm.
hundreds of thousands of civilizations all teeming, the universe is just all teeming in life. Well, the extraordinary thing would be if we didn't see some evidence of it, and so that's his take on it. I
In fact,
actually appreciate that.
he wrote a
So
book called Extraterrestrial: The First Sign of Intelligent Life Beyond Earth,
uh-huh.
and he explicitly talks about his involvement with researching Oumuamua.
Uh-huh. And so
So
so there is this bias, that we have, and to dismiss anything that suggests that there could be aliens. I I actually think that the fact that we don't see copious evidence of it is sort of is an indicator. It's a tell that there aren't any.
I'm
No,
going to read his quote right here. The only way to make sense of Oumuamua's, that's a fun word to say,
it is. I love saying it.
Oumuamua's
It took,
strange
I used to
acceleration
yeah, I used to practice it on the way to work.
without resorting to some sort of undetectable outgassing is to assume that the object was propelled by solar radiation, essentially photons bouncing off its surface. And the only way the object could be propelled by solar radiation is if it were extremely thin, no thicker than a millimeter, with a very low density and a comparatively
Uh-huh.
large surface area. Such an object will function as a sail, one powered by light rather than by wind. The natural world doesn't produce sails, people do.
Mhm.
Oumuamua must have been designed, built, and launched by an extraterrestrial intelligence.
And so assuming the facts that he has there, I think that's assuming the truth of the facts that he cited there, I would say that's very compelling.
It is very compelling. So, I mean,
Mhm.
there's like this opposite bias going on right now, I guess, in
Mhm.
terms of quote unquote mainstream science, where it's like, even when the evidence seems to suggest that it makes sense to that it's artificial,
To
you just
consider,
don't
well,
agree with it.
not to conclude that, but to consider that
To consider it,
they seem
it's
to work
dismissed
very
outright.
hard. Right. They
Yeah.
seem to work very hard to try to debunk it. And that's a psychological that's a cultural and psychological thing. So,
But I
I
mean, it makes sense. I mean, you should treat it as a valid theory and not as something crazy, because
uh-huh.
even, yeah, you're right. Like if many scientists themselves believe that there are extraterrestrial intelligences out there, then why would you discount the possibility of one that's just,
Right. That would, if there aren't any, if you don't see anything, that's what's extraordinary. That would be extraordinary.
so interesting.
So
Okay.
we could
Well,
keep talking about that forever, but
all right.
it's
I think we hit the
it's
limits.
time.
We are
Yeah.
way over time if we went by the half-hour mark. But with that, I'm gonna say look up, because you never know what you will see, right?
You
So
betcha.
with that, we will be back next week. Remember, you can support the show on
Yeah.
patreon.com/SG2 on space. And next week we will talk about Richard Feynman.
Let's
Since
talk
we
about
just
Richard
met him.
Feynman.
Yep, we've never talked about him. So
Right.
episode 180 next week. So that'd be a great show. And
Awesome.
thank you, everybody. And what is the thing that Leonard does? Namaste.
Namaste. And then also